This story begins in Wuhan, a city of 11 million inhabitants located in an interior area of southern China. It's October 2019. Like many cities in China, Wuhan is dominated by rows and rows of high-rise buildings and skyscrapers, the image of a nation experiencing an incredible and rapid transformation linked to the economic boom, preparing to become the largest economy globally in the span of a few years. But somewhere in the city, there are still old alleys and narrow, dark, damp streets. It is in one of these streets that a wet market is taking place, a traditional market where domestic and wild animals of all kinds are exhibited and sold. Some are common species, such as geese or toads. There are other species, such as pangolins, that are completely unknown to a Westerner. Right now, in one of these markets in Wuhan, a coronavirus is making a spillover. It is passing from an animal to a human, the first COVID-19 infection of the human species.
The coronavirus numbers this Sunday are simply depressing. I don't know a better word for it, or I wish I had a better word for it. Look at the map right here, 45 states. Red and orange on this map means you're heading in the wrong direction. 45 of the 50 states heading in the wrong direction. 17 of them.
Y volvemos a hablar del coronavirus. Brasil alcanzó una nueva marca en el número de muertes diarias, casi 1.600 en las últimas 24 horas.
Bergamo si è trovata a suo malgrado ad essere l'epicentro della prima ondata della pandemia in Europa, tanto da diventare la città simbolo della tragedia che ha segnato la primavera del 2020.
No one knows yet, around here, that a pandemic which will hit the whole world is about to start, and that in the span of a year it will have caused over 1.5 million victims. We don't know this because we are only spending a few hours in Wuhan. It is a short and banal stopover on a long flight from Italy. Our real destination is Guangzhou, also known as Canton, historically one of the trading capitals of southern China. It is to this megalopolis that we are headed for a reportage about food production. Our aim is to visit one of the most technological intensive farms in the world, a few hours' drive away. The reason for our trip is that we wish to inquire in which direction the global food production industry is heading. We want to document the exponential increase in the production and consumption of meat, especially in the East. A dizzying, uncontrolled increase which threatens our planet by further compromising its balance. We want to understand if the growth and intensification of farms is the right answer to the demographic increase, or if this out-of-control, intensive model is actually condemning us and the planet Earth in an irreversible way. At this moment, while at Wuhan Airport, we cannot suspect what is happening so close to us in that market. We do not know yet to what extent that what happens in the streets of a megalopolis, or on the top of a Chinese mountain, or in a small town in South America, or at a research center in the Netherlands, all create a series of dramatic ripple effects, reaching out to every corner of the globe, regardless of where we live, just like a butterfly wing beat. At this very time, we are still unable to understand how deeply everything is connected. People say that a visit to China cannot be considered complete without climbing a sacred mountain, which China has many dotted across its landscape. The most famous is the Taishan in Shandong. According to a Taoist tradition, whoever reaches the summit will live up to 100 years. At this time, we are on a mountain too, the Mount Yaji in the southern Guangxi region. It's October 2019. The name of this mountain in Chinese means holy mountain, but there are neither pilgrims nor Taoist monasteries here, just a fence that surrounds a huge production area. The buildings in front of us are massive concrete blocks built in the hollowed heart of the mountain. Looking at them from the outside, it's difficult to guess what they are. Multi-story pig farms containing hundreds of thousands of heads.
一层1217头，新版本的设计是1320。
Today, on Mount Yaji, standing 2 7-story pig farms, 2 9-story farms, a 4-story farm, and single-story farms. At the time of our visit, 2 other even more impressive buildings were being completed, one with 10 floors, the other with 12 floors.
这个楼房主场造价呢会高一点，但是它的使用的效率、效益很好。比方说7公斤断奶成本，在中国通常水平是280块钱左右，就算很好了。7公斤断奶成本，那么稍微做不好，就可能超过300块钱一头。做到260，那都是凤毛麟角，就是很少企业能做到260。通常情况下，那么我们7公斤断奶成本才200块钱。
Thanks to this ultra-intensive farming system, Yangshuan has become a pioneer in the world of livestock industry. On this site alone, the company is able to produce about 1 million pigs a year at full capacity, achieving a very low production cost thanks to the use of technology.
如果说跟平房比，你要养了那个保育猪啊，养后备猪，养小猪在里面跟母猪一起混养的话，病菌很多，可能这个猪就很难养。而我们这个平层的话，这个楼房的话，刚才讲了，我每一层的通风很特别的，我的通风不走回头路，也就是每一层相当于一个猪场一样，相当于平层的一个猪场。所以的话，我们就在里面刚才养了。 就算我在7楼里养，它跟对下面的猪群没有任何的威胁。
Nobody knows the real farming condition inside these buildings, because any independent investigation is out of the question in such a site in China, surrounded by fences, isolated on top of a mountain, inaccessible as a military base.
We think that even very big companies, even intensive companies, if he made some little change for animal welfare, we think it's great progress. We welcome for that. It not means intensive doesn't include animal welfare. We think even in intensive system, you can also do some things about animal welfare.
One of the objectives of a farm like the one on Mount Yaji is to create a barrier against the spread of diseases, which can be a real threat for the company's profits. Between 2018 and 2019, a terrible African swine fever epidemic nearly halved China's pork production. According to local estimates, as a result of the epidemic, Chinese farmers culled and destroyed 100 million animals, about 40% of the total production. In those months, the only remaining evidence of what happened are very rare and terrifying images of mass suppressions, filtered on social networks, showing bloody scenes of thousands of animals buried alive in mass graves or even set on fire. Extreme solutions to get rid of infected and therefore unprofitable animals culling them in the least expensive way possible. Using technology, Yang Shuang managed to partially contain losses in 2019, a company employee tells us.
Usually they have lost half of their pigs, and in Yangshan we also go through a loss, but this loss may be controlled at a 10%.
As a result, Yang Shuang still managed to produce 2 million pigs in 2019. The number seems enormous, but not when compared to the size of the Chinese industry, which in 2018 processed 441 million pigs in one single year. In the first half of 2020, the Chinese government authorized and financed the construction of 20,000 new pig farms across the country, with an overall capacity of another 150 million pigs.
It's expected that by 2030, China will be the biggest economy in the world, with nearly, not exactly, but nearly 30% of the global GDP. And this means that the purchase power will increase in China, and this reflects directly to the consumption of meat. When the country becomes richer, they consume much more meat. And today, for example, they consume 55 kilograms per person per year, and it's expected that they will increase by 10% just by 2025. So there will be increase both in consumption of milk and meat in the coming years, and this increase will take place particularly in China.
The surge in consumption and production affects the pig sector, but also other branches of livestock production, especially poultry. In China and the rest of Asia, poultry farms are experiencing a similar pattern of frenetic growth and intensification.
Broiler layer and ducks, you are 30,000
for one.
Yeah, one house.
We are in Qingdao, in the Yantai Peninsula, eastern China. It's October 2019. We are attending one of China's leading livestock industry events, Viv Qingdao. It's a key agriculture business where companies, investors, and breeders meet up to trade, discuss the scenario of the industry, and plan the next steps to take.
The shortage of pork is actually huge. So even if they import more, they will not be able to satisfy the increase in the consumption. So they will need to increase the domestic production of all animal proteins. So we think that over the next couple of years, poultry will be the biggest beneficiary for both Southeast Asia and China. And to do that, to increase the production, we need to invest a lot more to increase the capacity. So that, for at least for Southeast Asia, we need at least $10.5 billion over the next 10 years.
代理可能还要高的。
哦，这 if you want build, you can build as high as you can. He says.
因为它都是那种滚压线生产的，一只带缸要多少给你出多少。
China is simply replicating, on a wider scale, the Western model of production and intensification, and the West itself is promoting the model in Asia, indeed. Even the fair that we are attending is organized by V&U Exhibitions Europe, a company based in the Netherlands, and Holland is the biggest player of the event, through organizing meetings such as the Roundtable of Chinese and Dutch poultry producers, or delivering a showcase for a wide range of exhibitors who populate the stands with their own technologies.
Suppose, for example, you have, after birth, you have about 10% dead piglets. From this 10%, about 5% is mortality. The cause is overlaying by the sow.
How did it work?
Well, did work. Very simple. As soon as the sow wants to rise, it stands up. The lift will also come up, so the piglets can get away. Quite a good system. We use that for years and years and years.
Yeah.
People are always very happy with it. Farmers are very happy with it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We could say that the entire food production system in China is following a pattern that has already been traced back to the West, which has become a global standard in recent decades.
This trend of intensification has taken place in Europe, has taken place in the rest of the world, and now it's the turn of China. They are building this huge farms using the genetics that is used everywhere, also following the standard of intensification that is used in Europe, is used in North America, and used in Latin America. So China is not an exception in this regard. So they are replicating the same model.
China is using a model created in the West through decades of research into genetics and technology. The aim of this model is to maximize profits and production while reducing costs and risks for companies. We move on to the Netherlands. The country is considered an example of the European green economy, a country where cycling is as common as driving and invests like no other in sustainability and livability. But it is precisely here, in the so-called Silicon Valley of agri-food, where there is a global hotspot for research in the intensification of farming. This is where the most technological and intensive models for the production of tomorrow's food are studied.
If we look at the industry, apart from further development of free-range farms, we see that some very big farmers are aiming to further intensify. We got the same number of animals in the Netherlands over the years, but the farms tend to become bigger. Recently there was opened a new farm for poultry housing 1 million broiler chickens. So that's really a lot of chickens if you want to keep them in one farm. We slaughter the chickens on farm, and the chickens really live in very bad conditions, very close on each other, and they are treated not as animals, not as sentient beings, but they stand on their own litter, where they have their own droppings on. They are treated like objects, for instance, or like if they were cauliflowers without any feelings. So that's definitely one trend in the Netherlands: further intensification, driven by economy.
Gert Laus is referring to this farm, Marcel Juciper's multi-story broiler farm, a few kilometers south of Nijmegen in the Netherlands. This building as well does not even look like a farm, yet it has an unrivaled production capacity.
Normally you have to catch the birds, load them on the truck and transport them to the slaughter plant. There is a risk for contamination to the environment. At the slaughter plant, all birds from different sources come together, they are slaughtered. The interesting thing from the farm from Marcel Kuipers is that they intend to do it on the same place. So their idea is that the birds will be loaded by a belt which is running, so this goes very smoothly. It will likely reduce the injuries you normally can have due to catching of the birds, and there is no transport, so no contamination to the environment, because the birds are slaughtered at the same place and only the meat will be transported.
Unlike laying hens, which are commonly farmed in multi-story cages, the most intensive broiler farms generally develop in length and width, but not in height. This is for hygiene and health reasons and for the protection of animal welfare. Instead, Marcel Juciper's farm uses technology to cram more animals into a single tall facility. The idea here is to concentrate all the breeding cycles into a single plant, including the reproduction of the chicks and the slaughter of the chickens after about 30 days from birth. A system to optimize production and reduce costs.
In de toekomst willen wij een korte keten van vleeskuikenproductie maken, waarbij wij alle ketendelen op één locatie bij elkaar brengen, tot en met de slachterij, met het doel om alle transportbewegingen van dieren te voorkomen. Het is beter voor de dieren, beter voor het milieu en lagere kosten. Dat is het idee van onze innovatiekracht, van hoe krijgen we het nou voor elkaar om dingen te doen die beter zijn voor het een en het ander en voor de omgeving. Je werk goed doen, dat is doen wat er iedereen verwacht. Maar als je iets wil veranderen en je wil innovaties teweeg brengen, dan moet er iets bij.
The Marcel Jupers farm is a fitting example of how Holland is able to lead the world in the most extreme systems of intensification of animal breeding.
Daarnaast hebben we ook heel veel buitenlandse contacten gehad altijd. Dus we zijn naar India geweest, naar China. Nu hebben we weer een kennistraject met Finse. Ik denk dat wij mee de basis gaan vormen voor een nieuwe manier van vlees produceren. Op een veel betere manier.
A paradoxical example is that the technology in Holland is used for two apparently opposite purposes. On one hand, new farms are designed to improve sustainability, intended to supply the demanding market of Dutch customers who are increasingly attentive to the issues of environment and animal welfare. On the other hand, innovations help Dutch farmers to build hyper-intensive farms, which reduce costs and allow them to produce large quantities of meat for exportation.
Each year, there are hundreds of millions broiler chickens slaughtered and reared in the Netherlands, many for export under very bad conditions, and some in the Netherlands produced for the domestic market under slightly better conditions.
What we are seeing here are images taken by a drone above a dairy farm that produces milk and calves in California, in the United States. The large number of sheds are for intensive pig and broiler farms and are located in Mexico on the Yucatan Peninsula. By increasing and intensifying livestock production, in 2020 we have farmed and slaughtered over 160 billion animals a year worldwide. Of these, 84 billion are land animals, particularly chickens, hens, pigs, cattle, and sheep. The rest are farmed fish. And this doesn't include more than 1 trillion wild fish caught for human consumption. In total, over 160 billion sentient beings are slaughtered every single year. We can barely perceive the magnitude and significance of this number, which far exceeds another figure, 113 billion. That is the number of human beings who have ever lived on this planet. Men, women, the elders, and children who have walked this earth since humankind first made an appearance on its surface.
Todo ano queima chama isso aqui? Porque estão limpando, estão botando fogo para limpar, para legalizar a nossa reserva legal.
Essa reserva aqui é uma reserva APP do lago e depois do lago tem a reserva legal que é do assentamento 12 de outubro. Só que essa reserva aí foi ocupada. Tem muitos que estão utilizando da queimada para fazer limpeza. É um foco aqui, é outro ali, nós não estamos dando conta de apagar fogo, é muito fogo.
We are in the village of Claudia in the Amazon region. It's August 2020. In 2020, the fires in the Amazon have reached record levels since the early 2000s. Right now, Fernanda Ligabue, a video maker working for the Norwegian Rainforest Foundation, is shooting these images showing the local villagers fight against the fires, which have started with armed gangs funded by unscrupulous entrepreneurs to conquer new lands to extend their productions.
Uma coisa sem explicação, eu não tenho nem como explicar para você o que eu sinto. Sinto muita tristeza de ver tudo queimando, tudo acabando, tudo virando em cinza, as coisas que era tudo verde, tudo bonito, virar o que vocês estão vendo aí.
In 2020, the satellites of the Brazilian Space Agency recorded 103,000 fires in the Amazon region of Brazil and another 64,000 in the Cerrado. Expansion of pastures and soybean crops are by far the main cause of these fires.
Historicamente, aqui no Tocantins, mas no sul do Maranhão, Piauí, os fazendeiros usaram o fogo contra as comunidades, né? Queimar a casa, queimar a roça, né? A limpa do pasto, né? Com fogo, isso faz parte desse conjunto de ações criminosas dos conflitos, né? Os conflitos agrários.
Que eles chegam no barraco da gente, a gente não tá, queima as coisas da gente, como já aconteceu aí. E aí eles andam aí só tocando fogo, esses jagunços. E aí a gente tá aí, na luta. A gente se sente cercado, né? Porque aqui a gente tá no meio.
Eles foram chegando e foram tomou todas as áreas de terra da gente e aí a gente perdeu aquele fogo que a gente tinha, aquele conforto que a gente tinha e hoje a gente não tem mais. Ou saía ou morria. E até chegou o dia de dizer para meu pai, ó, se você quiser é 15 hectares, se você não quiser é nada.
A fazenda Estronda aí é muito grande aí, que eles dizem que é deles aí é 365 mil hectares. Na verdade, eles ocuparam as áreas que é das comunidades, né? Invadiu e entraram fazendo guarita.
Aqui nós estamos em 3 áreas de retomada, tentando retomar, recuperar o nosso território. E os fazendeiros se sentem muito encorajados agora para incendiar algumas escolas indígenas, para fazer entrada dentro do território.
According to the NGO Survival International, what has been happening in recent years in Brazil is unprecedented in the last 50 years and is putting a strain on not only the farming communities, but also on the survival of the oldest custodians of the Amazon rainforest and the Cerrado, the indigenous people. In 2019, at least 274 indigenous territories out of a total of 472 were affected by fires.
Então, o nosso ataque que estão fazendo com nós, atacando a nossa comunidade, atacando as aldeias, fazendo despejo, são ataque paramilitar, que eles não é qualquer pessoa que eles contratam, são também profissionais que eles contratam para fazer isso, né?
In recent years, the indigenous people in Brazil have paid the highest blood price for this conflict of the territory. In 2019 alone, 24 people were murdered in Brazil due to land conflicts. 7 of them were leaders of indigenous communities.
A nossa luta maior realmente também é demarcação de nossos territórios, porque os Guarani Kaiowá é a maior população indígena que as lideranças, as comunidades, os professores morrem por conta dessa luta da demarcação de nossos territórios.
Nós entendemos que existe um projeto de genocídio em curso. Nós entendemos que existe um projeto também de ecocídio em curso, de etnocídio, que é a matança da nossa identidade. E as pessoas falam, mas isso é muito sério. E eu falei, não, então eu errei. É um genocídio legislado, é um ecocídio legislado e é um etnocídio legislado. Porque é o próprio Estado autorizando a matar. E o que nós vivemos hoje no Brasil não dá para ser chamado como projeto de país. Porque, na verdade, é um projeto de execução da vida.
We have lost more than 420 million hectares of forest since 1990. In just 3 years, we're losing an area of forest the size of Italy. We're losing them in Latin America, in Africa and Asia. And the drivers behind that loss are different. Overall, the main driver is agricultural expansion. That accounts for 73% of all the losses of forest in the tropics. But it varies between regions. In Latin America, it's primarily large-scale agricultural expansion. In Africa, it's mainly small-scale subsistence agriculture. And in Asia, it's a bit of a mix of both, plus also some expansion of urban areas.
Os animais que tinha aqui, tanto animal que tinha, via veada, paca, cutia, onça tinha onça aí. Mas com toda essa devastação aí, ó, se subir em cima dessa chapada aí, é só soja, é só campo aberto. Aqui tudo era cerrado, igual você tá vendo ali, daquele lado ali, ó. Aí, agora vai virar tudo soja. Vai virar tudo soja agora.
Então a soja ela vai para fora, praticamente toda exportada para fora, né, para ração de animais, frango, né, e suíno. O produtor ele só vai se interessar em abrir novas áreas porque eles têm garantido compradores de soja, né? Então a partir do momento que a Cargill compra ou financia a produção da soja, ela está sim sendo responsável direto pelos trabalhadores e as trabalhadoras que estão sendo assassinados no campo, né? Pela água que está sendo saqueada, pelas terras que está sendo saqueada no cerrado, né?
Fires are man-made, so they're being lit to clear forest and make way for agricultural production. Every forest has its own dynamics. There are unique economic drivers. In Indonesia, we're talking about palm oil in particular and pulp and paper as sort of the commodities that replace forest. In Brazil, it's more soy and beef.
Tim Steinweg is part of Chain Reaction Research, a group of researchers who traces raw materials related to deforestation. By matching wildfire maps with commercial data of soybean trader locations, the researchers tried to discover the names of the companies which buy soybeans that are linked to deforestation.
People don't set fire to land for no reason. There has to be a motive, and what we're seeing is the motive comes from international commodity supply chains.
Looking at the 2019 data, the researchers found the highest number of fires, over 24,000, in a supply radius of 25 kilometers around the silos of Bunge. This is one of the main multinationals that trade in agriculture commodities around the world. In second place on this ranking, the researchers found another 15,000 fires around Cargill silos. The Brazilian corporate ABC Industria and Commercial follows in third place with 9,000 fires around its facilities. These images, taken with the drone from Greenpeace, show a cargo of Cargill soybeans reaching the port of Liverpool, England. It's 2019. The soy comes from the Brazilian Cerrado and is reaching Cargill's own processing plants in the UK. An international journalistic investigation coordinated by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism showed that some of these soy come from crops in recently deforested areas. The reporters followed the shipment to the UK, where the soy was used as feeding for the chicken factory farms of Avara, a company owned by Cargill itself.
Nel caso delle produzioni animali, ovviamente il principale responsabile dell'impatto è appunto l'alimentazione degli animali. In entrambi i casi di studio, sia nella produzione di carne e di pollo, quindi diverse tipologie di broiler, ma anche nel caso delle galline ovaiole, quindi calcolando l'impatto del chilo di uova prodotte, l'alimentazione è il principale responsabile dell'impatto.
In the UK, around 1 billion chickens are slaughtered every year. It is precisely the numbers that make the difference. In Europe, over 7.2 billion chickens are slaughtered every year. All of these animals are raised using high-protein feed.
Gli alimenti di origine proteica sono o di origine animale, farina di pesce, oppure di origine vegetale, tipicamente la soia e farina di soia. Soia di cui l'Europa è scarsa produttrice rispetto ai consumi, mentre il Sud America è grandissimo produttore, quindi importiamo centinaia di migliaia di tonnellate di soia all'anno dal Sud America e questa soia è in parte coltivata su suoli su cui precedentemente c'era la foresta amazzonica.
While Cargill dominates soybean imports in the UK, Southern American soybeans reach the rest of Europe mainly in cargoes owned by Bunge.
Il fatto di acquistare queste materie prime fuori dall'Italia ormai è una cosa, come posso dire, che è assodata, perché è così ormai da decenni, e il fatto poi di avere il porto di Ravenna qui vicino per noi è una comodità.
Until a few years ago, Europe played a leading role in the purchase of soybeans from Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. In recent years, however, things have changed very quickly.
And if we look at markets, what we can see in recent years has been a real surge in the dominance of China. Whereas 15 years ago, the European Union by far dominated imports of Brazilian soy. This is looking at just the trajectory of soy exports. We can see that in recent years, and the pattern is only continuing now in 2019 and 2020, that China really pulled ahead, not just from the EU, but also from the domestic market within Brazil.
Looking at the soybean flows that have departed from Brazil in recent years, it can be seen that in just a few years, Chinese imports have far outnumbered those of the old continent. Here it is revealed that the other side of the explosion of meat consumption and production in China, namely the surge of imports of soybeans from South America, which are growing at the same frenzied pace.
杨翔1995年开始，当时还不叫杨翔，是吧？从1995年开始呢，转型要做饲料，是吧？到1998年的时候，我们就推了一个，在全中国来讲，都具有这个很大创新性的一个产品，叫膨化料。
Even the Yangshuan company we met at the beginning of this story started producing feed, until the demand from its farms absorbed all of its production capacity.
那么我们呢就小时 H 啊，那么我们就自己买了这个设备，就是机床啊、车床啊这些东西，买了设备回来加工。 膨化机，我们自己改进膨化机，我们自己做，就是连膨化机这个设备，我们都自己做，买了车床，买了一些机床啊，
机床，因为一开始其实是请别人生产，
别人是有的，样机啊是有的，但是产量太小， 根本满足不了大规模生产的要求。我们就自己买设备来改进这个膨化机。
This is one of the feed processing plants of Cargill in Anhui, central China. This is obviously the same Cargill whose silos we have seen in South America, surrounded by deforestation and fires. At the time of our visit, Cargill has just inaugurated a new poultry farm with 30,000 chickens in order to ride the growth of the Chinese meat consumption. Cargill was also protagonist at the Qingdao Expo that we visited in the first part of the story, as a consulting and feed supplier company for farmers.
I think since the beginning of I set up the farm in 2013, we have been using Cargill as our nutrition specialist. So I think I like Cargill's very efficient way of service their customer. And they have a big resource pool in Netherlands, in US. They can give us the support, which I think is comfort. I don't need to build my own nutrition team, because you could imagine with 6,000 sow, the nutrition is very, very important.
La Cina è particolarmente interessante appunto non solamente perché sta aumentando tantissimo la richiesta di prodotti di origine animale, quindi carne, ma anche latte, formaggio, anche prodotti, ma perché la Cina è uno dei maggiori produttori di prodotti che vengono usati nell'allevamento animale, quindi soprattutto mangimi e additivi per i mangimi. Già la Cina è uno dei maggiori 4 produttori di mangimi al mondo, insieme con gli Stati Uniti, ovviamente i paesi dell'Unione Europea e il Brasile. Ci si aspetta appunto che la richiesta di questi mangimi aumenti e è importante appunto farla cercando di utilizzare al massimo risorse locali, appunto sottoprodotti dell'industria agroalimentare, facendolo però in maniera che si producano alimenti sani.
On September 22nd, 2020, the President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, gave a speech to the UN, pledging for the first time to eliminate its greenhouse gas emissions within a certain time.
中国将提高国家自主贡献力度，采取更加有力的政策和措施，二氧化碳排放力争于2030年前达到峰值，努力争取2060年前实现碳中和。
On that occasion, Xi was very resolved, stating that humans can no longer afford to plunder nature, as happened so far.
第三，这场疫情启示我们，人类需要一场自我革命，加快形成绿色发展方式和生活方式，建设生态文明和美丽地球。人类不能再忽视大自然一次又一次的警告，沿着只讲索取不讲投入，只讲发展不讲保护，只讲利用不讲修复的老路走下去。
In the same month, however, Chinese government officials flew to Brasilia to conclude new agreements with the Brazilian government. On the agenda was the promise of new Chinese investments to build infrastructure such as ports, roads, and railways, particularly in the Amazon and the Cerrado regions. A strategic transport network intended to increase the flow of raw materials to be exported to China. First of all, soy.
China today is represent about 20% or 21% of the global population, but they only have 9% of the land, and they only have 6% of the total water globally. This explains one of the problems of China is how to produce food for their population, and livestock is a part of this problem.
There's more. In addition to the impact on the environment in recent years, the uncontrolled increase in demand for raw materials, such as soy, driven by China, is inevitably starting to produce effects on food prices in various parts of the world. It is an inevitable side effect. Competition between economic interests and people's right to food is bound to happen very soon if we do not urgently change course.
It's the whole model that we may question. People used to eat much less meat in the past, and now the meat consumption is increasing. The livestock sector is resource hungry. That means the livestock sector requires lots of lands to produce feed, and for some species, they are in direct competition with the staple food, with the human.
We need to do three things. We need to protect, manage, and restore our forests. In order to protect them, we need to protect them from illegal deforestation. That means changing our food systems, stopping that agricultural expansion.
The equation is as simple as it is dramatic. According to several studies, if everyone on the planet ate animal products like the average American, not only should we clear what remains of tropical forests to produce pasture and feed, but we would still need at least an additional third of the planet's surface to be converted into agricultural land. The problem is that we are going precisely in this direction. A blind race, which is leading us straight towards the destruction of our one and only Earth.
And we already visited building number 2, quarantine building for the farm staff. And this is the quarantine area for driver.
We are back at the headquarters of Yangshan Company in China. What we now face is another building with several floors. This time, it is not a building packed of animals, but of people, the company employees who work on the farms.
第二个区域就是第一天隔离区域，所有采样完的人就到第一天隔离区域隔离。那一天一夜之后，采样结果出来了，如果它的结果是阴性，就是不携带非洲猪瘟的话，那就到第2和第3天隔离区域去继续隔离。那么如果它携带非洲猪瘟的话，就要在第一天隔离区域继续隔离，直到它的结果显示阴性为止。那在第2、第3天隔离区域要隔离1天2晚，结束之后再从这边派通勤车，把他们送到相应的猪场去。
Perhaps we have forgotten, but before COVID, it was very rare to use the word quarantine. But in this production area, the term has already been in common use for several years.
Yes, they should quarantine here every time if they want to back to farm.
Okay.
Yeah. Now the farm staff have a day off every 2 months.
Okay. And after they have to do again.
Yeah. For that building, at most 200 people. And for the driver quarantine area, no less than 100. No less than 100.
The employees of the farms on Mount Yaji cannot leave here for more than 1 day every 2 months to prevent viruses from entering or exiting the buildings. After all, the defense against diseases is one of the reasons why they are hypersensitive farms, such as Mount Yaji.
They need larger farms because it's a buffer to contain viruses that may enter the farm. So this will be the trend going forward, and we think that the large farmers will take market share.
So I think we are very fortunate to have the correct site selections. Any biosecurity start with the right site selections and how you build a farm. So for example, we make sure we have enough land. We are in a very isolated area. We are in a very cold climate, so like windy area, so that the virus cannot grow that easily.
Even this entrepreneur's company has built its intensive pig farms on the top of a mountain, with the main purpose of countering the spread of epidemics, such as African swine fever, also known as ASF.
And we built a farm at the top of the mountain so that surrounding definitely had no other farm, and also can provide us a very natural biosecurity surrounding. You know, many of our employees have worked in a previous farm which they contracted ASF, and you can imagine the psychological impact when you see such a huge death, such a huge destructions on a lovely animal.
In June 2020, in full COVID-19 emergency, a study raised the alarm of a new potentially pandemic virus spread precisely in Chinese pig farms. According to the authors of the research, the virus was a variant of H1N1, the famous swine flu virus that was responsible for the first pandemic of the 21st century, which in 2009 caused over 18,000 deaths worldwide. The study immediately aroused alarm because it revealed that the new virus was capable of being transmitted very easily from pigs to humans, to the point that already infected 1 in 10 workers on Chinese farms. The alarm was silenced a few days after the publication of the study, not because it was unfounded, but because luckily the virus had poor ability to transmit itself from one human to another, so it couldn't spread from farms.
So yes, the zoonosis, this transfer from the animal world is happening with greater intensity. The virus usually originates in the wild, is transmitted often by wild birds, bats, etc., into the livestock, the kept livestock, the domesticated animal. More particularly, we see it more frequently in pigs and poultry, but you do see it elsewhere too, in other animals. And of course, we can't deny that these zoonoses often take that route. This we know from science. And of course, probability is that the more you have of a thing, the more that thing is going to be the likely conveyor.
As we learned during the COVID pandemic, many diseases arise when we destroy or invade natural habitats, such as forest, and come into contact with different species of wild animals, such as bats. Already in 2016, United Nations Environment Agency had given the alarm for a worrying increase in the insurgence of new zoonoses, diseases transmitted from animals to humans. The report also emphasized the role of intensive farming in amplifying this transmission.
Diseases have often in history jumped from animal world to humans with carriers, could be fleas or be what it might, way back to the Middle Ages. However, what we are seeing are a speeding up with which these viruses that do exist, that have mutated and jumped, at times mutated, and these pathogens that are coming at a high speed. Marburg, Nipah, bird flu, H5N1, SARS, MERS, Zika, Nile fever. Where do I stop? So each of these have come into the humans, Ebola, of course, into the human setting. What we saw before were perhaps that these viruses were not as efficient in that their transmission spread was not as efficient. The danger of COVID-19 is that you can carry it and transmit it, as you and I both know, as everybody knows, for 2 weeks without knowing it.
Along with the destruction of natural habitats, the increase in intensive farming globally is one of the main reasons why the frequency of epidemics originating from animals is growing. Factory farms have two side effects indeed. They facilitate the circulation of viruses and make their continuous mutation easier. The biggest pandemic in modern history, the Spanish flu, which caused 50 million deaths between 1918 and 1919, was in fact a zoonosis, an avian flu. There have been many avian flus circulating among farms in recent decades, although they have rarely made the leap to humans. Even during 2020 and 2021, while humanity is fighting against the coronavirus, the livestock industry is grappling in many parts of the world with the new terrible wave of avian flu.
Yeah, talking about poultry, of course, the avian flu is a big risk that many people know. In the Netherlands, almost 2 decades ago, there was a big disaster in the industry where they killed 30 million poultry just to get the virus under control.
Avian influenza, it's a difficult issue because on the one hand we would like to have the chickens outside, making use of the outdoor run, but it also is a risk for avian influenza because it comes, for example, from ducks or other birds, wild birds that can infect the chickens, so we have to keep them out, we have to keep the birds inside. Biosecurity is very important, it's a very important part of keeping diseases out of the house.
And in the last years, again, we had outbreaks of high pathogenic avian flu in the Dutch industry, and all these outbreaks were in intensive farms, although they claim that these farms are closed and that the disease can't get in. The virus manages to get in, and when it gets into an intensive farm, it's extremely dangerous because it's spreading very rapidly, and there's a big risk that the virus mutates and that it also can become a threat to human beings.
By dramatically increasing the number of farmed animals, deforestation, and destroying the last natural habitats, all causing climate change, ensures that we are essentially creating conditions for the perfect storm for the outbreak of new epidemics, and we are experiencing the result in our lives.
And so the more we expand our livestock, the more we as consumers demand our proteins from livestock and from meat, well, then the more the market will respond.
However, after COVID, the next pandemic on the horizon will not be a zoonosis, at least according to FAO. When we started working on this documentary, COVID had not yet arrived, and there were already talk of zoonoses, but the most imminent health threat from the livestock industry was another.
We are facing phenomenon of invisibility. People do not see nothing, they do not understand. Oh, it will be good to see headline. Oh, attention please. This year we lost 700,000 deaths. Can we ask CNN or BBC or Euronews to send messages?
Antimicrobial resistance is the ability of bacteria to develop resistance to drugs like antibiotics. The most resistant the bacteria become, the less effective the drugs are, until it becomes impossible to even cure simple infections, such as pneumonia, which then becomes a deadly threat. It sounds like science fiction, but on the contrary, antimicrobial resistance is already the cause of thousands of deaths each year.
AMR is a huge global threat to public health. At the global scale, we estimate that about 700,000 deaths are related to antimicrobial resistance. We expect these to increase. In the European Union, the estimations are 33,000 deaths. These are huge numbers in terms of lives. And unless radical actions and accelerated multi-sectorial actions taken, we don't expect these to decrease.
When it comes to cancer, there is actually a few cancers that you can't treat at all unless you have antibiotics. Leukemia was one of them. And very often, under treatment of cancer, your immune system is very low and it's very easy to get infections. Could be because of surgery or chemo or other things. And also after treatment, if you live with side effects or with cancer, often also your immune system is low and it's easy to get infections. So you need antibiotics and you need antibiotics that works. As far as we see it now, if there's not a change and we get new antibiotics in the future, more cancer patients will not survive, they will actually die. And they will not die of cancer, but they will die of an infection they got during the treatment.
According to the United Nations, without a radical turnaround, antimicrobial resistance could cause 10 million deaths a year in 2050 and produce damage to the economy equal to that of the 2008 financial crisis, pushing 24 million people to extreme poverty. All this only because we abuse antibiotics. The more antibiotics we use, even when they are not needed, the more the bacteria develops resistances. An issue related to hospitals and doctors exceeding in the prescription of antibiotics. Unfortunately, this issue also concerns another field, the livestock industry.
As I was saying, antimicrobial resistance is not only health sector's problem. We need to work together with all the other relevant stakeholders. Environment is one, animal health, food, agriculture.
According to the Food and Drug Administration, about 80% of antibiotics sold in the United States goes to farms. The figure in Europe is very similar. According to the European Medicines Agency, in the old continent, 70% of antibiotics are sold to farms.
The use of antimicrobials leads to the selection of antimicrobial resistant bacteria, and so the real problem are the resistant bacteria. And these resistant bacteria, they are a problem both for animal health as well as for human health. The more the bacteria become resistant, the more difficult it will become to treat them with antimicrobials.
Geroen Delwolf is an animal entomology researcher at the University of Ghent, Belgium, and one of the leading experts on the link between antimicrobial resistance and animal husbandry in Europe.
It's very clear that the strongest driver for antimicrobial resistance is antimicrobial use. So there's plenty of research showing that the more antimicrobials we are using, the more resistance we will see in the bacteria. And we also see that at the level of animal health, and we see that at the level of human health.
In animal husbandry, antibiotics are used regularly, particularly in pig farms and poultry, with so-called mass treatments handed out through feed.
L'utilizzo del farmaco è inteso come antibiotico prevalentemente nelle prime fasi della vita del suino, dove sono le fasi più delicate, le fasi in cui si hanno un animale molto più sensibile alle temperature, quindi anche gli ambienti hanno bisogno di particolari cure. Per questo motivo nelle prime fasi si utilizza una certa quantità di antibiotico.
Even fish farms, in pools or in open sea, make extensive and regular use of antibiotics. Also in this case, the treatments are administered massively, with medicated feeds spread over pools or sea cages when early signs of disease appear.
It's a lot about attitude. It's a lot about attitude, changing your attitude. A lot of antimicrobial usage is habit. We used to use this amount of antimicrobials. We used to put them in the feed. There's a lot of things that people are used to, and often there is a fear, and they are afraid to leave that behind, because they're afraid that if we leave behind the antibiotics, we're going to get a lot of diseases, we're going to get economical losses.
There is more. In several countries around the world, antibiotics are used on livestock not only as a cure for diseases, but also for their much appreciated side effect, the ability to make animals grow faster. This practice is prohibited in Europe and the United States, but is still a common procedure elsewhere. In South America, for example, Chile is the only country that has banned it. Until mid-2020, the use of antibiotics as growth promoters was a standard practice in China as well. Also for this reason, in 2013, China alone was responsible for half of the global consumption of antibiotics, and 52% of these drugs were given to livestock.
For these ones, Chinese government always pay more attention to antimicrobials. For example, in this year, the Ministry of Agriculture, they have just made a rule. The rule said that by the January 4th, 2020, the use of growth for antibiotics for growth is not learned again, is forbidden. And this rule is very, very strong, must obey by the farmer. So I think it is a very, very big step for the government to make a very, very huge change.
The ban on antibiotics as growth promoters in China took effect in July 2020. China is still by far the largest consumer of antibiotics today, but has been on a path to reduce its use for years. The reason is that the country also ranks first globally for the amount of antimicrobial resistances that has developed among the population.
Anche lì vediamo che la Cina è abbastanza attenta a guardare cosa è stato fatto negli altri paesi e adattarsi, adeguarsi e cercare di diminuire più che possibile l'uso di antibiotici negli allevamenti animali, soprattutto l'uso non per ragioni terapeutiche o profilattiche, ma l'uso per la crescita degli animali. Quello è qualcosa che come FAO auspichiamo che venga assolutamente diminuito, se non eliminato, ovviamente prendendo le adeguate misure perché non si diminuisca la produttività degli animali, ma è qualcosa che va fatto.
Epidemics, pandemics, resistant bacteria. All of these threats need to be responded to with an approach that experts call One Health, an approach that does not distinguish between human health, animal health, and ecosystem health, and each one depends upon the other. A fundamental approach, even if we talk about the most serious threat to our health and the health of our next generations, the climate change.
We will get out of the coronavirus. It will be a terrible exit. There will be many people that we already have and will have lost. It'll be a deep economic slump, but humanity, civilization will survive. But if we do not take action on nature and on climate, I'm not so sure. Because what does a 4 to 5 degree world look like? What kind of viruses will be released from the permafrost? These are issues that we don't know. These are new viruses we haven't even thought of, which is why looking at nature as a solution space, looking at nature as a positive investment for essentially our insurance policy, it's not a bad thing. It's good for people, it's good for the future, and it's certainly good for climate.
There is an indefinable, mysterious power that pervades everything. I feel it, though I do not see it. It is this unseen power which makes itself felt and yet defies all proof, because it is so unlike all that I perceive through my senses. It transcends the senses, but it is possible to reason out the existence of God to a limited extent.
The Hindu religion, like Buddhism, considers all living beings to be connected in some way. Small fragments of a single entity, an invisible power that pervades everything, as in the words of Gandhi's famous speech on the existence of God delivered in London in 1931. Also for this background, one of the basic principles of Gandhi's life was being a vegetarian, a choice to consistently respect the idea of non-violence that he placed at the center of his existence. For the same reason, India is traditionally known as a country with a vegetarian vocation. But even in India today, modern ways such as globalization and health are entailing a sharp increase in meat consumption. It is precisely the case of India that shows how globalization is encouraging the meat consumption surge worldwide. Globalization means modernity, which in turn means leaving behind any culture, religion, or traditional model, even when this model happens to have a function, even when it was needed to guarantee a more sustainable balance to the society.
And I would add individualism and freedoms, that we're so caught up in our individuals and our freedoms that we don't have community anymore. And without community, you can't come together to solve problems or to decide what kind of a life you want to live or what kind of a world you want to leave.
Activist and philosopher Lisa Kemmerer has developed years of study to the influence of religions in determining the relationship that human cultures have developed with animals. According to her research, the ongoing change in many societies is the result of an ever-increasing influence of a culture devoted to profit rather than ethics.
Well, I don't think religion's any weaker. I just think that different forces are shaping society. For people who are religious, I think if they still, scriptures or writings, whatever they have in their religion, those stories are very important to them. But things like capitalism now are extremely important, and it's dominant forces in society that kind of shape how we go. So if you care more about money than you do about God, which, if we're honest, that's how we live. So it's what's shaping our society that affects how we live. So I think that our basic ideals, the ideals promoted by Western societies, have been extremely damaging in so many ways to people themselves, as well as to animals, as well as to the environment and the earth itself.
However, a fundamental question remains. How could it happen that our societies, perhaps mastered by the ethics of profit, but certainly also based on other ethical principles, such as solidarity, have come to accept such a massive increase in animal production within intensive systems in every corner of the planet? Is it possible that there is an ethical question behind the lost balance that we are creating on our planet?
Yeah, it's difficult to present the ethical questions and arguments in a format that is journalistic, because people aren't used to the idea of essentially reporting on an ethical argument. It's not empirical, it's philosophical.
This is a female sturgeon. Sturgeons were among the largest fresh and brackish water animals in Europe until a few decades ago, when they were almost extinct due to overfishing and river degradation. Basically, today sturgeons survive on farms. The breeding system of these river fish is based on keeping the females in closed pools for a period ranging from 7 to 20 years.
Per esempio queste che sono le prime vasche, queste contengono degli storioni russi, quindi il tipo di storione che fa il caviale ossietra, e si vede che è proprio un po' diverso, sono tutti diversi uno dall'altro. Allora, questi qua sono esemplari che hanno
almeno bisognerebbe guardarli uno per uno, però so che qui dentro ce ne sono che hanno anche una ventina d'anni.
Waiting for them to reach sexual maturity and produce precious caviar eggs. After years and years spent inside the pools, the female sturgeons are subjected to ultrasound to check for the presence of eggs. When the harvest is ready and abundant, the only way to collect the eggs is to kill the mothers and open their wombs.
When people are taught in school about the evolution, we learn about how we evolved from aquatic beings to terrestrial animals, and this somehow gets entailed that creatures living in the water are primitive, and creatures living on land are more developed. But this is not the case. The thing is that we all evolved from a common ancestor, but we all evolved in the same direction. So we have a very recent history of observing fish as animals and not like the cereals of the ocean. In fact, if you think about how we mention fish, we call it fish farming, and we call it harvesting. So all these things about how we deal with the production of fish even refer to agriculture more than rearing animals, and that creates a problem in giving fish or incorporating fish in what we call the moral circle. So we tend to give the animals that we think are more evolved a moral status. For example, primates. Now, we all acknowledge without thinking that primates are very developed animals and they're very intelligent, so we give them a moral status.
Basically, the way we end up treating sturgeons and other fish depends on the distance between our species. The more distance from our species, such as fish or birds, the less we're able to recognize in these beings the status of sentient beings, because we do not acknowledge their signals and behaviors.
And because of that, we tend to think of fish as primitive, and we don't know how to identify expressions of fear, expressions of joy, of pain, because we are so far apart from the world of fish that we cannot recognize those things.
Despite the distance between our species and the sturgeons, we see how the maternity of those fish in the farm is quite disturbing. The closer the species is, the more empathy we feel. This is why it's even more disturbing to see the images of newborn calves taken from cows meant for milk production. It could be less obvious to feel empathy when looking at images of chicks in poultry hatcheries. As it is known, male specimens are considered waste by the egg industry, and for this reason, they must be eliminated as quickly and as cheaply as possible. An inhuman practice that is used everywhere, which perhaps as a society we can accept because of the distance we have from poultry, hens and chickens, which limits our ability to understand and recognize their feelings.
L'allevamento dei polli che rappresenta in maniera emblematica l'industrializzazione del processo di allevamento, perché non solo sono i grandissimi numeri, ma soprattutto il fatto che c'è stata una forte spinta alla selezione genetica per arrivare ad avere una razza che si prestasse a questa idea di meccanizzazione della produzione, ossia degli animali come un pezzo all'interno di un processo meccanico oggettivo in cui bisognava ridurre tempi e costi della produzione della singola unità per poter abbassare il costo complessivo almeno al consumatore.
The example of the chicken is the most effective one for telling how animals stopped being sentient beings and became objects. The so-called broilers were created in the laboratory over decades of studies and genetic selections. Even today, research continues to work to create animals that produce a larger and softer chicken breast in the shortest time and at the lowest cost.
So the selection of the breeds we use, we intentionally choose birds that are developed to have a balance between production efficiency, so things like feed conversion and breast yield, but also important health characteristics like cardiovascular strength and leg strength.
The American corporation Tyson's Foods is the second largest company in the world for the production of chicken, with almost 2 billion animals slaughtered every year. At this company, as in all companies that deal with poultry farming intensively, genetic research is a basic element to produce much more, spending much less.
Over 15 years, in terms of with the Aberdeen broiler, we have managed to get it so that we're using about half a kilo less of feed to produce the same size of animal. If you're saying, okay, we want a bird which grows more slowly, because the viewpoint in some areas is that that will improve welfare, then you are actually going backwards in terms of the efficiency, which therefore, as a result, becomes less sustainable.
Perhaps in recent decades, the very distance of species has allowed the livestock industry to play with animal genetics with impunity, creating new, more efficient and productive breeds, and to develop even more intensive farming systems. However, especially in recent years, with the rise of social media, the industry had to build a wall of invisibility. Otherwise, ordinary people would have seen and rejected such aberrations. This wall created distance and made the workings of farms and slaughterhouses inaccessible. But it was also wisely built with marketing practices and strategies. The companies never miss an opportunity to depict a world where animal proteins are irreplaceable, where animals smile happily on the packaging of food products, where eating meat for lunch and dinner is a fundamental part of our culture and tradition, and it's definitely essential for our health.
You know, the industry is interested in selling its products, and all industries do that, and they market their products and they try to present them in the way that they think will make the consumers buy them. So certainly the animal rights movement has a huge amount of work to do to overcome big industries with multi-billion-dollar advertising budgets. No question that that's a factor. But if we start to see a shift in people's purchasing, then industry will follow them, because the industry wants to survive. I mean, no meat producer wants to be another example of Kodak, the film producing company, you know.
Peter Singer is a philosopher and writer, considered by many to be someone who inspired the modern animal rights movements.
It's true that many people are not fully aware of what we do to animals in factory farms, of the millions of animals crowded together in sheds, of their miserable lives, of the way in which they've been bred to grow faster, despite the fact that that is contrary to their own welfare. All of that is true, but I think you have to ask, well, why don't people know this? And part of the reason, at least, is they don't want to know it. They look away because they fear, perhaps correctly, that if they did know it, they wouldn't be able to enjoy their dinner, the usual dinner that they have every day. They wouldn't be able to enjoy as much.
We have to constantly deal with invisibility, but that relies on our choices. It is up to us to decide whether to face the reality of industrial farms or whether to look the other way.
It's possible that consumer demand, coupled again with changes in technology, but this time changes more favorable to getting rid of animal suffering, and also incidentally more favorable to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, they may lead the industry to shift as well.
If we avoid looking the other way, probably all our ethical models would simply push us to connect the dots and reject systematic cruelty and violence. They would probably push us to tackle once and for all an ethical question clearly postponed for too long.
Harm is one of the most fundamental things that in all ethical theories is opposed. Causing harm, all else being equal, is viewed as a bad thing across ethical theories and across the political spectrum and so on. And because non-human animals are capable of being harmed, capable of suffering, for example, it seems like the most basic ethical principles that we already apply among humans extend to non-human animals.
We brought it on ourselves. We've been very disrespectful of the environment, very disrespectful of animals. We've been gradually invading the world of the animals. We've been forcing them to spend more time together, which enables a virus or a bacteria to cross the species barrier from an animal into a human. And we've also been forcing some animals to move out of their habitats to crop raid and things like that because of what we've done to their homes. And we're hunting them, we're killing them, we're eating them, and we're trafficking them.
How we're going to reclaim ourselves from individualisms and freedoms and capitalism and the grip of a market that has no interest in us or in a long-term sustainability. How are we going to live? Do we really want to carry on as we are until there's nothing left and we can't turn around and the blood on our hands and the ugliness of our society? Or are we going to get it together and realize that there are ways of living that make your life better? Whether or not you envision an ultimate power behind it, there are ways of living that are simply the right way to go. And it's not just for you, it's because we're really very small. And what matters isn't us, but the legacy we leave behind. And that requires us to stop and think again about how we live.
Apollo 11, Houston, you can terminate TV at your convenience. We've got enough tape, and you can start PTC at your convenience. The rates look super for starting up, over.